Welcome back. So today we're going to go over all the steps we need to do to prepare the albumin paper. It's been 7 days since we first mixed up the albumin solution. We strained it and then it's been sitting in the refrigerator for the past 6 days. So today what we're going to do is prepare these sheets of paper, which will take 2 coatings and a curing step in between, and then we'll be ready to start sensitizing with silver. So here we go. So here's our bottle of albumin that we just mixed up, and I'm going to go ahead and pour it into the tray that we're going to be using, and it works best when it's at room temperature between 75 and 80 degrees. And so since it's coming out of the refrigerator, I'm going to go ahead and pour it into the tray first so that there's more surface area that can start to warm up as I'm preparing the paper. So we'll go ahead and pour that in, and as we do that we want to try to avoid getting bubbles. We want as few bubbles as possible. So I'll just gently kind of pour it from one side. You can see it's nice and clean. And if we do get some bubbles, we'll just be removing those with that same stainless steel teaspoon that we used previously. And we don't need to use all of the albumin that we have in here. We have 1 liter. So we'll just use enough to give us a nice full surface so that it's going to be able to float along the top of the surface. So that'll be plenty for what we're doing today. So we'll let that sit while we start getting the paper ready. Okay, so we're going to get ready to start coating the paper. So in order to do that, the first thing we want to do is to put holes in the paper first, and then we're going to pre-soak it on the back side so that it'll float a little bit easier. And we're going to be using 2 types of paper. So the first paper I just cut up, and so it's a little bit curly right now. And it's a Legion paper. It's called Stonehenge. It's their ultra white paper. And the really nice thing about this paper is it's only $2.25 for a 30 by 22 sheet of paper. So I can get actually 8 sheets of paper out of that. So it's a really economical way. It's 100% rag. It's a good weight. It floats really well, and it creates a slightly less glossy surface. I think a little bit of it absorbs into the paper as opposed to the other paper we'll look at, which is a lot glossier. But what we want is a hot press paper so that we have a really smooth surface so that the detail will be as sharp as possible, and so that we'll have as glossy of a surface as possible as well. The other paper that I like is an Arches paper. It comes only in these blocks. It comes in packs of 20 sheets, and it can be purchased at the local art supply store. And this is also a hot press paper, although the block of 20 sheets for this runs at about $35. So it's a lot more expensive, but it creates an even glossier surface. Both of these, I believe this one is cut to 7 by 10. And the papers that we cut down are going to be 7.5 by 10. So really comparable in size. You'll just have to decide or test them kind of yourself. So let's get started. So as we're ready to coat the paper, the first thing that we're going to want to do is pre-mark the holes. I've constructed a drying rack that will allow us to dry it kind of so that it stays flat and also dry evenly. So once the emulsion is coated on here, it's going to be kind of flimsy and wet, and it's going to be really hard to punch holes in it. So what we're going to do is at each of the corners, we're going to be taking just a thumbtack, and underneath here I have just a piece of mat board or binder's board so that the pen can push through easily. It's not going to be stopped as if it would if we were pushing against, say, wood or a tabletop. So we're just going to take the pen, and moving it about 1/4 of an inch on each side, we're going to just place a hole. And then I'll rotate that around, and we're going to poke another hole and continue. Now we're doing this on the front side because as we go to hang this, it's going to be hanging from the front side, so it'll be easier to put the pen through if we do the holes from the front side. Now that we have all of the holes, the final thing that we want to do before we start to coat the paper is go ahead and pre-mark it. We're going to be needing to hang this twice, and we want to hang it in opposite directions. So I'm just going to put a small T up here at the top part, and again, this is on the back side, not on the front surface. And so you'll notice I just put a small mark on here that says T. So the first time that I coat the paper and I hang it, I'll make sure that the T is facing at the top. We're going to be hanging it long ways, not kind of portrait style. It's going to be laying landscape. Okay, so now that those are marked, we'll move it over to the plexiglass and start getting them wet. So in order to pre-wet the paper, I'm just going to take just a normal sheet of paper towel. I'm going to fold it in half. And then what I'm going to do is wet the surface. So I'll just run some water, and I like to just kind of drip it along here, and then use my hand. I don't want it to be oversaturated, so I'll just kind of use my hand to smooth out the water, and that way it gets kind of an even coat. If this area is going to stay dry, I can kind of re-wet it. Better to have it a little bit too wet in the beginning and add water than to have it go too wet. If the paper gets too wet, then it makes it a little bit harder to float. So what we want is just to dampen the backside. What will happen if we don't do this, as soon as we lay the paper on top of the albumin or any wet surface, the opposite side of the paper is going to want to curl away because there's an inequality in the moisture. So this will help kind of pre-soak the backside, not the front. So when we lay the front side on the albumin, it will then kind of equalize and lay flat on the paper. So we're going to take this over to the other surface and lay it on top of our paper. So here are the sheets of paper that we've already pre-punched our holes, and so we're going to go ahead and take the sheet of paper towel that we just created, and we're going to be laying that on top of our pieces of paper to wet the back. So because this is really curly right now, because we just cut it from a rolled piece of paper, we'll just gently kind of lay this along the back, and then what I do is try to smooth it down so we get as much of the paper towel in contact with the actual paper. So we'll just kind of smooth that down. And we need to allow it about 3 minutes to soak so that there's a chance for the water to get down in there, and that'll kind of hold it in place. I'm going to go wet another sheet and we'll lay that on as well. Okay, so here's our second sheet of paper towel. And we'll just go ahead and lay this again directly on top of our piece of paper. Try to get it as smooth as possible, press it down, and smooth it out so that it's going to hold that paper down. Okay, so while that is soaking, we're going to go ahead and just double check, make sure that there's not any bubbles on our surface of albumin, and we'll get ready to start floating the paper. So it's been about 3 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and peel back the first sheet of paper towel, and we now have a wet piece of paper. So what we want to do is, in order to lay it into the albumin easily, is we need to kind of curl the front edge just a little bit up and away from the albumin. If we allow it to just lay or have kind of bubbles or ripples in it, what will end up happening is parts of the albumin will come up and over the edge, and it'll cause uneven prints, and it'll look ugly, and it'll also cause curling in strange ways. So we just want to kind of ease the edge of this up a little bit. I don't know if you can see that, but we don't want there to be kind of ripples in there. So we want it to be kind of flat but rolled up slightly. Then when we go to lay it in, we're going to kind of curl it up and lay it down on top of the albumin. Okay, so that's ready.